Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to do set 51, imaginary numbers and complex numbers. So now we're going to talk about when we have square roots of negative numbers. Those are what we call imaginary numbers because we can't find them on a number line. So they're not a real number. So we use the script I to represent the square root of -1. So for example, if we have the square root of -2, we can change that to be written as 2 times -1 underneath our square root, and we can separate that into square root of 2, square root of -1, and square root of -1 is going to turn into our I. That is no longer underneath the square root. So my square root of -2 is going to be simplified at square root of I, or square root of 2I. So let's look at these examples here. I'm going to take and break it into 13 times -1. And the square root of -1 is going to turn into I, and that is outside of my square root. Okay, we're going to break this apart into 4 times -1. So we have square root of 4I, and we can simplify square root of 4 into 2. So my answer is 2I. Sometimes we have two square roots, and we would multiply the numbers underneath. And we got -6. We're going to break that into 6 times -1. We're going to take the square root of -1 out. So we end up with 6 square root of 6I. Then we have what's called complex numbers. Complex numbers are made up of two parts, a real part, which is numbers we know, plus an imaginary part, something that contains I, or that imaginary number. We add real numbers and imaginary numbers just like we add variables in like terms, okay? I can only add my 2 and my 3, and I get my 5, and I can add my imaginary parts, and I have 11I, okay? So here I've just added my like terms. If we look here, this one's given to us in parentheses, which when it's just the positives, we can just change it and by dropping the parentheses. But in this last one, we need to distribute my negative before I eliminate my parentheses. Now it's just like our previous problem where we look for like terms to add, and so we get 24. And we look for our imaginary parts to add, and so we have -2I. Sometimes we'll see multiple i's in our problem. So let's talk about this. You need to know this, okay? Memorize it, it's super easy. If we have I, that's the square root of -1. I squared is the same thing as I times I. That's the same thing as square root of -1 times square root of -1. So when we multiply those, we multiply our -1's, and we end up with square root of 1, and square root of 1 is just going to give us 1. Wait, just a second. When we multiply, here we're going to pull our negatives out. Oops, sorry guys, I misspoke there, so let's revisit this I squared. I squared is going to be the same thing as the square root of -1 squared. Well, we know squaring and square roots are going to cancel each other, so I squared is going to be the same thing as -1. I to the third, we can break that into thinking of it as I times I squared. We just discovered that I squared is the same thing as -1, so I'm going to change that into I times -1, which makes I cubed -I. I to the fourth, I can rewrite it as I squared times I squared, and we know that I squared is -1, so I can write this as -1 times -1, which turns into a +1. So whenever you see I squared, you can automatically go, I know that's going to be -1. I cubed, oh, that's going to be -I. I to the fourth, that's going to be 1. And you don't have to go back in and reprove it every time. All right, so let's look at our first term, 2I times I, which is the same thing as I squared, which we know is the same thing as -1. So this becomes a -2. For my next term, I have I times I, which is I cubed, which is -I. So -3 times -I is going to turn into a +3I. 2i, I can't simplify, so I'm just going to rewrite it. -4, can't simplify that, so I'm just rewriting that also. And then here, the square root of -4, we looked at that on a previous slide. So square root of -4, we know becomes 2i. So this is -2i. Now I'm looking for like terms that I can combine. I'm going to look at my real numbers first, because remember they come first in complex. So we get -6. Then I have 3i, 2i, and -2i. Well, the -2i, the 2i are going to cancel, so I'm left with 3i. All right, so make sure if you have questions on this, you come in and touch base with me and ask about set 51. See you guys then.